All right, Queens and Kings of Swift, we're going to go through and build the app that you had to do for this particular exam. It's a Game of Thrones themed app. If we take a look at how this will behave when we go ahead and run it, we'll see it will pop up initially. We'll see what is a splash screen here. It starts to play after 1 second wait, the Game of Thrones theme. This logo bubbles up from the bottom, just like the buildings do on the Game of Thrones intro. If you click on this, we stop playing a sound if the sound was playing, and we can go and we can take a look at each of these individual houses here. Now, some of the houses don't have words or coat of arms, some do. If there are words, we want to put quotation marks around them. If we want have coat of arms, we want to show the coat of arms, but if there aren't any coat of arms, we get rid of the label that says coat of arms. We don't have any quotes around the words. This all of this material comes from an API, which is known as an API of Ice and Fire. Ice and Fire is the name of George R.R. Martin's series of books, the Game of Thrones books here. We can see if we take a look at this API that it starts with a bracket here, which means the array starts right away, and each of these houses or families in the Game of Thrones is listed as an element right afterward. And we can see there's the name, the region, the coat of arms, and the words that we've got. Now, the region has one of 10 different names in here. And when we download some material from the URL that I gave you, this will also be the name of an image which we can use to display in a particular region. So, this is the region Dorne being shown here on the map. This region over here is the region for Westlands that we're seeing as well. Now, the way the URL is set up is it shows one page at a time. So this is the URL that I've given you. But I did mention, we can see we go all the way down there. These houses are in alphabetical order. If I scroll all the way to the end, I'll see the 50th house here. They're not numbered, but this is the last house that I've got. It's House Buckler of Bronzegate. But if I went up here and I change the URL and I say 2, we should see the next house alphabetically shown up top, which is House Buckwell of the Antlers. So again, all these interesting names. The maximum size is given here, a size of 50. But if you went through all of these, as was mentioned in the exam, the last one would be page 9, and then if you go to page 10, what we'll see here is we've gotten all of the data so that we get an empty array in here. So we'll eventually want to handle page JSON. It's a little different than the page JSON that we had before, but you're going to use your Swift skills to try to figure out, how could I go ahead and get through this? But before we get that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to build the app. First thing we have to do as we prepare for this, though, is we're going to get into Xcode. We're going to create a project called GoT Houses. And I mentioned that you've got some resources at this particular URL. So why don't we go ahead and grab those resources first. And these are at this URL here, SwiftyGOT. So I'll head over, open up a new tab, and we see my Google Drive here. And we're going to grab everything which is in here. So you'll see there are a bunch of different files. There's a pod file I've even gotten here, the theme song, and even if you want your icons to show up, I've given you that in case you want to show your friends. So I've highlighted everything in here, and the way that we typically download stuff after we've highlighted it is we just say download. It's going to zip that stuff up. It's going to save it to the desktop. And here we go. Saving it to the desktop, and it'll save it as a zip. Then we can get into the zip file and decompress it once it's been downloaded. It's been downloaded here. And then inside we should see all of the different files that we've got. So what we're going to do next is it says that we should create this application, and it should be called GOT-houses. And we should also install Swifty JSON and Alamo Fire. And it tells us that we could use the pod file that exists on this drive as well if we'd like. We just need to make sure that we absolutely call it the same GOT houses. This should be the name of our application. So what we're going to do is launch Xcode now. I'm going to get rid of the working version that I'd had before. I don't need that. And I am going to do a new project. It's going to be a single app. GOT Houses is what I want to call it. Save my Git repository here. Click on Create. And we're ready to go. Now, in order to install our CocoaPods, we should not be up and running here. But you know what? Since I've downloaded everything, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all those resources in my assets catalog here. So I am going to go ahead and highlight everything that I've just downloaded. So if I double click on that, I can see all of these things that were in the file that I just decompressed. I'm going to grab them, plop them over into here. It copied the pod file. You don't need to copy the pod file over inside of this, but it's not going to hurt things if you don't delete it here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit out of Xcode, out of my project. Now you could open up this pod file and recreate a pod file if you want to, but a nice shortcut that you can do as well is I'm just going to copy this pod file, go back into my desktop here. GoT Houses is the project that I've created. And if I do a Command V to paste this pod file, I can just go ahead and use this. So now all I need to do is to go into Terminal here. And I'm going to say CD space, and I'm going to change space to this directory. Press enter. Now normally I would do pod init and then I would copy over all of this stuff here, so absolutely do that. You want to make sure if you ever do copy a file though that your target is the same as the name of your project, so what's in between these two quotes here. So if you named it properly, you can do exactly what I'm doing as well, just to save yourself a step. And I am going to say now, just making sure that I do not have Xcode up and running. I got the simulator up and running, so I'm going to get rid of all of that stuff. Simulator probably doesn't matter. And I'm going to say pod install. Press enter here. It's going to go ahead and install Swifty.json and Alamo Fire right in this project folder. And when I'm done with that, I should be done with my terminal. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to launch gothouses.xc workspace, and I can start to build my app. Now, I'll stretch this out so that we take up the whole screen here. And one of the things that I've advised you on doing in the instructions for this exam is just to get through things very quickly. Why don't we all assume, so that your stuff looks like the little images that are on the exam, that we are all going to be building on the profile for what is, at the time that I'm recording this, the iPhone XS. So click on that guy there. I have a little notch up top, and also when I build and run, I'm going to build on an iPhone 10. There's no reason why you can't say XS too. Interesting, you notice some of the changes in the interface. So this is XS with a lowercase s. It's very curious up here. This is XS with an uppercase s. So there are sometimes inconsistencies in Apple's UI and naming conventions. It's rare that those details slip through, but you pick them up from time to time. And so now let's go ahead and start building our app. So the very first thing that we're supposed to do is to embed a view controller in the navigation controller. So I'm just going to click right here on our embedded, so click right here on view controller, go up to editor, embed in navigation controller, boom. We've seen this several times when we've done examples in class and in the online videos that you've gone through for the book too. So now that we've done this, it says add a table view controller. Refer to the table view in our code as table view. So that means that this is what our standard is for our Iboutlet. We always call it table view. We're going to add 4 constraints, 0, 0, 0, and 0, to bolt it to the sides. So I'm going to click on my object library. I'm going to type in table up here to get the table view to show up. I'm going to drag this over here, let go, and then I'm going to go down to set the constraints to 0, 0, 0, and 0. Add 4 constraints, and we stretch this out. Now, I also mentioned that we should refer to the table view as table view in our code. So since this is part of this question, and I don't want to skip any questions bits here, I'm just going to option click on top of our table view, drag over under the word class, and I'm going to type in table view in lower camel case to create an Iboutlet that links my code to this table view. Now I'm going to go back and follow these questions again step by step, but I've got a little bit more to do in my main storyboard here. So the next question that we have here says add a table view cell, set the style to basic, set the identifier to cell, and set the selection to none. So again, I'm going to go right over here. I'm going to grab the table view cell. We just drag that right into the table view itself. Then we're going to change some attributes. So I'll show my attribute inspector here. The selection I've mentioned should be none. That's just going to get rid of any lingering gray selection that we have sometimes when we click on the cells. If you ever prefer that you don't have that and you do want the selection, you can have lots of different options that are there. The identifier should be capital C, lowercase ell, which is a standard that we continue to use in class. The style should also be basic, which I've mentioned right here, and we can see that the word title shows up as well. So this is looking good. We've done everything that was requested of us right here. Next up, it says for this, we want to use the Papyrus font in the project, and it shows you right here how to get to set the font. So we can go right inside of Table View, Cell, Current View, and Title, and then in its Attributes Inspector, we can just change the font to Papyrus. So I've clicked right here on Title in Content View. If I expand it, I can see the title label shows up. And in here, under the Labels Attributes Inspector, I can click on Font and Custom Font. And I don't want it to be Helvetica, I want it to be Papyrus. By the way, if you ever get a long menu like this in Xcode, if I just type in P, it goes down to where it is, or I can type in PAP for Papyrus, and it selects that for me automatically. Press Enter, and that's accepted, and click on Done, and we can see that this changes to that Papyrus format. Now, next up here, it says create a string named houses, and it's a string array, and it should hold a sample of house names in here. You can put in any. This is just temporary, but then we're going to do everything necessary to get our table view to display the string of houses, put that into an extension. And again, the actual data in here, we're going to change the data structure, but we just want to make sure that our table works. So that's what we put some bogus data in here just inside of a single string array. And again, that should be called houses. So we'll get back into viewcontroller.swift, and we're going to type in var houses equals, and then because this is going to be just some sample data here, you can really put in anything if you want. So how about Stark, Lannister, Greyjoy, and Targaryen. I don't know if I spelled that right, so sorry, Game of Thrones fans, if my house name spelling is incorrect. Now, do everything we need to do in order to get the table view to show. So we've created our Iboutlet for the table view, which is great. In viewDidLoad, we always do a we set up our table view dot data source equal to self, and the table view dot delegate equal to self. And again, this just makes sure that whenever something happens to the table view code and iOS needs to get some stuff from the data view, source or the delegate, it just jumps up here and looks at the self code, which is our view controller code here, and that's where it knows it can get things that it needs to do for the delegate or the data source. And that stuff is going to be inside of our extension. So we're going to put an extension in down here. And we don't need the extension, but it's a great way to organize our code. So we'll put all of our table view stuff in here. And if I start to type in table view delegate, I want UI table view delegate is one of the protocols we need to adopt. And the other one is table view data source. And if I do an open and close curly in here, again, view controllers, because we're extending this particular class, Xcode will think for a little while, and then it will tell me, hey, you need to have two particular functions in here, so it can put in the protocol stubs, which essentially says fill in these two functions. The first function I'm going to fill in here is going to be, it's going to return houses.count. And again, this is something that we've seen in class and in all of our different examples with table views here. Then what we do here is we create a cell. So we say table view, and it's DQ reusable cell. We always use the one with the string and the index path here. So press enter. The identifier is going to be the capital CELL that we put in as the identifier when we set up our table view cell previously. For index path, it should be index path, just like this guy right here. Then we return the cell that we've created. What we do in the middle here, and remember, see how this has a return field in the function that Apple gave us in the protocol stub? So that's what we're creating a cell and we're returning a cell. But what we need to do is before we return the cell, we should set up what we want to display in the cell. So if we say cell.textLabel text, and if you forgot the question mark, that would be added by Xcode. It would give you an error and offer to fix it. And then what we're going to say in here is houses. And then we're just going to put in index path dot row, which is just going to get us the particular house string for the index path dot row, which is just the element in the array that we're showing 0, 1, 2, 3 like this. So now if we build and run, this should work. And again, we're going to get rid of this data structure here, but it's good to build and run things as you build stuff in stages, just to make sure that you're not, you haven't made any error here that you couldn't catch early on. So after we build and run, we're going to see, we don't have our splash screen or anything set up. We're doing that later on, but we should see the results of our app up and running in just a second. Sorry, you've got to wait for me. Fill in time here. Attaching, so it's going to run soon. And boom, we've got all 4 names that we entered in here as the names for our houses. So this is working good. I'm going to stop this from executing and return to see what the next step is. So now the next step here is to set up a house info struct and the houses class. So very first thing we should do is create a Swift file named houseinfo.swift and use it for a custom struct called houseinfo. So we'll just go up here. I like to put my my models just above my view controllers. So if I click on appdelegate.swift, I can go up here and say File, New File. Since this is going to be a custom struct, I'm going to click on Swift File right here. Click on Next, and the name for this again is going to be houseinfo.swift. It will add the .swift for me. Click on Create here, and I've created it. And the class should also be called houseinfo, open curly, close curly. So I've created that. Now next up, it says that we should have 4 different properties: name, region, coat of arms, and words, and they should all be initialized to empty strings. So since they're properties, we use the var in front here, and what we're going to do is just use the different names in here. So I'll say name equals open and close parentheses since it's an empty string, region equals, or open and close quotes, I should say, var coat of arms equals open and close quotes. And also, what else do we have in here? Var words equals open and close quotes. And I didn't put a space in here. That's why that's grumping at me. So we've created this house struct as an independent struct that can be used throughout our app. And what's nice about this is I can use this anywhere. So I'm going to use it right now inside of a class that we're going to create called houses, which is going to grab each of the individual houses that I've got. When I take a look at my API call here, each one of these is going to be house info. We can see name, region, coat of arms, and words right here. Also, what I can do is, when I finally have house detail, is I can pass this information over as a complete struct instead of having to pass over separate variables for name, region, coat of arms, and words. So let's just make sure that we're following along all the different steps here. It says create a Swift file for houses.swift as a custom class named houses. So right underneath what I've created with house info here, if I say the same thing again, new file, whoops, I should say, I'm sorry, I said to create this as a struct, not a class. So I'm going to call this a struct right here. Now I'm going to go back under house info. I am going to say new file, Swift file, and this is going to be called houses. So house plural, houses. And I'm going to call this one a class, houses, open and close parenthesis. Now again, what I'd mentioned in class is, there are some more detailed reasons in terms of why you would use a struct or class, but I've advised you every time you want to download data, via an API, that you should use a class instead of a struct. It'll make things a little bit easier here. By using a struct here and initializing everything, we don't have to worry about, creating initializers. That's good programming practice, but on an exam where we're trying to build this within 2.5 hours here, I want you to get things up and running as quickly as possible and not get bogged down into some of the details here. So do make sure for your own projects that you know what we've covered with initializers. You'll be covering convenience initializers as well when you do the Snacktacular project, but right now this will get you through things very quickly. Now inside of houses and the houses class that we've created, we mentioned that we should create a house array, which is an array of house info, and it should be initially empty. So let's go ahead and do that. Get back into our code. Var house array colon, and this is going to be of type house info, and it's initially specified to be empty. Now the next thing we have up here is our API URL. It's a string, and it should be this very string that we grab. So we're going to say var API URL equals, and it's a string. And one of the things that I mentioned in here as well is in the files that we've copied over, I've actually created a file called URL to text or URL to copy.txt. So if you go back over into the files that you've downloaded, just to make sure, you can certainly type that in yourselves. But if you wanted to instead just click on this, open it up, and Command A to select all, Command C to copy it, and then go back over here. If you paste this right in, you'll start to see the data that we've got in here, and that just prevents you from having to type all this in and worry about typos and whatnot. So I'm going to Command V to paste that in there. I've got my API URL. And the last thing that we need to keep track of is a page number, and that's going to be an int that starts at 1. So if we say var page number equals 1, I don't even have to set this up as an int or this is a string. It will be implicitly declared as those types. So now that we've got this all up in View Controller Swift, we want to change the variable houses from the old string array and instead declare it as an instance of the houses class. And so we want to make sure that we refer to, we want to create an object called houses here, and we want to refer to the house array property just as we have when we've done things like the Pokemon or working on the Harry Potter spells example that we've got. So let's go back over to our View Controller code here. And again, we started initially just to be able to display some data here. We put in some bogus data, making sure our table view will work. But now what we're going to do is we're going to say houses equal, and it's going to be houses, and I'll do open and close parenthesis here, so it'll create a new instance of the houses class. Now initially it's got nothing in it. Remember, we initialized these values in here. Well, I shouldn't say it's got page number as 1 and API URL is this, but we have no elements in the array, and this is actually what we use to display inside of the table view. So I mentioned in the exercise itself that if you run right now, you won't see any of the data in the table view cells because we haven't put anything in house array yet, but we will in just a bit. So what we do is we update this. So instead of houses.count, it's going to be houses, and it's going to be house array.count, because that's where we have all the names of the individual houses. And then down here, we're going to do something very similar. So we're going to say houses dot, it's going to be house array. But remember, the house array gets us to each element is going to be one of these house info structs. So if we want to show the name, then after we have the index value, index path.row, then we do dot, and we specifically want the name property out of that. So again, should be very familiar to you now based on all the examples that we've done in class. You could build and run now to make sure that it's working. And again, we're not going to see anything, but just to make sure that we don't get any errors, or I should say, you just won't see any data in the table at this point, because again, we got rid of the stuff that we initialized here. So this is an empty array, but everything is working. We've set everything up fine. So with that said, the next thing that shows up is we've got to get a list of houses and display their names in the table view cells. And it says, okay, use the API URL that we've got, and we have that set up in Swift file, or houses.swift, and we want to get the key name, region, coat of arms, and words. And they all precede the string value. Remember, the data that we get are key value pairs. So we can see here's the key for house all good, here's the key for the region, here's the key for coat of arms, here's the key for words. Just noticed I made a change to the exam that I'm going to distribute this. I'm recording this the day of the exam. This is, I think, the 4th time I've gone through the exam just to try to make sure that I iron out any of the details, and you've got a smooth exam document that you go through. But I got rid of the URL was being highlighted here, and I didn't want to confuse you because you're actually not going to need these individual house URLs for this exercise. However, if you click on this, you'll see that there is a lot more detail. So if you ever wanted to go back and build this app out and do some other cool stuff with it, you could certainly explore that on your own, just in the way that when we clicked on Pokemon, it got a bunch of details to each of the individual Pokemon. But what we need is just these 4 items in here: the name, region, coat of arms, and words. So let's scroll down here, and we're asked here to write a get houses method, and that should be, it should get the house info on all of the houses. We should write this inside of our houses.swift. And those are all houses that are returned by the API URL. So right now we're just going to work with those first 50 houses. Don't worry about getting any other pages of data yet. There's some help in here as well. I do suggest that you go ahead and print JSON just to make sure that we've got the right stuff coming out. Then I also mentioned that it's probably a good idea also to print out the individual house array elements. practice just to make sure that we're getting each of those elements as well. We can look at the output in the console. You don't have to do that, but it's pretty good practice just to make sure to try to catch any errors before you get to the next stage, and it might be more difficult to find an error in your code. And I also warn you that sometimes CocoaPods inaccurately show a no such module error in Xcode. So we'll go ahead and do that. And I'll do the print statements that I mentioned as well. So we should be in houses.swift, and we're going to call this function that we're going to write get houses. So we'll say func get houses. We're eventually going to want this to be escaping, but we don't need to worry about the escaping bit right now as we get things started. Now, when we do Alamo Fire, when I start typing in Alamo Fire doesn't show up, and the reason for that is because we haven't gone ahead and done an import of Alamo Fire. We will also want to do an import of Swifty JSON. We've always done this whenever we went ahead and got information over the web. And then I can type in Alamo Fire. Dot request, and then the request that we put in here is our API URL, and then it's going to be dot response JSON, and open and close curly, and then we say response in. Now, remember when we had talked about kind of software Legos? So this is, we have this in every method that we go ahead and grab data in. And in addition to doing that, we also set up right afterward a switch case statement. So we'll say switch, and it's always going to be response.result. So response is what we're getting back from this call here. And once we've got this data, we use response. And the result is going to give us one of two values here. It's going to give us either the case of dot success, and then what we want to do is we want to take whatever value that gives us and put it in something named value, colon, otherwise we want to say case dot failure, and what we want to do here is just say let error, and then we put a colon in right after here as well. And I'll put in the data for the error first. And again, just by saying in here, we want a print statement in here just to warn the developer, hey, we've got an error, and you can go back and look in your code. So I usually put in here an emoji. You certainly don't have to, but if I do control command space, the emojis come up. And if I do angry in here, there's the angry emoji face. It'll just show up. Any of my errors will show up better if I put in, some of these different emojis here. And I'm just going to write in error, colon, and then inside of my string interpolation, I'm going to say error. And if you do dot, this is actually a data structure which has this localized description in here, which will get a description of the error. So it's always good to do that if you ever have an error that you're returning here, so that you can see a little bit more of a description as to what went wrong. And then we're going to say failed to get data from URL, and then I'll just put in the URL inside of more string interpolation here, which will be self.api URL. I'll give myself a little bit more room. I don't need this on the side. Now the error that I'm getting over here just says, hey, you've also got to have some content inside of the success case in here. And so for the success case, first, why don't we just go ahead and do a print of our value that we get back in here. So I can either say print value, but we always have in the start of our statement as well, we take the value and we convert it into JSON. So if I say let JSON equal and then capital JSON, this just takes this JSON data structure and it converts into a JSON value we grabbed back here from the value. So it just takes this raw data, which is almost like a string, and it's going to convert this and create for us here a JSON value. And now if I just go ahead and say print in here, and I do a, typing my string interpolation right in here, slash JSON in here. By the way, it's always possible for you to do like ****, so you can find that really quickly. And if I go ahead and do a build and run right now, I should just see all of the JSON print out, and the JSON should look identical to the JSON that I see on this page, starting with house all good, and the very last house that I have in here. If I scroll all the way down to the end, the 50 different houses that I've got, big scroll, should be this house buckler of bronze gate. So let's see what's going to pop up here after this starts to run. And see, I'm seeing nothing here right now during the execution, but it should go ahead and print this up. And the reason why it's not printing it out is you could probably tell why it didn't do that. So I've set up this getHouses method, which is awesome, but I did not call the getHouses method. So clicking on viewcontroller.swift, we go over here and we type in, let's see, it's lowercase houses.getHouses, which is the method that we just created. And again, we haven't done the escaping clause yet, so we don't put anything in here. We're not displaying anything in the table view yet, but we do want to make sure, hey, this looks like we've got all of our houses. And if you scroll back over here, you can see, you know, just before the sort of first level brackets in here, we have the house buckler that we're going to get in here. So, and go all the way to the top, and you can see the very first house that we have here is the one that you were expecting as well, which is coat of arms founder. There's words and regions, and the name of the house is House Allgood, and that's exactly like we've got here. House Allgood, region, words. One of the things that you notice too is that the JSON isn't necessarily returned in the same order. That's totally okay. You do have, however, though, just all of the elements are there. So now that we've got this up and running, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we parse the JSON. Now this is the thing that's a little bit tricky here, but I provided you with some hints inside. So you want to modify your table, or we want to label these guys here, but first let's take a look. It says we printed the JSON, we suggested that. Then let's print out the data for each array that we've got. But notice what we take a look at when we look at the JSON. So the JSON that we have up here, it says that there's no results key before we begin the array. And there was one in Pokemon and there was one in Harry Potter. So normally what we did when we did Pokemon and Harry Potter was we grabbed this individual data. Let me get back into my houses in here. And in fact, I don't need this print statement anymore because we verified that things are printing out. Typically what we did was we went through things. First, we found out how many elements we had. So we went into results and we said, let number of Pokemon equal, and then we did JSON, and we said bracket results bracket dot count. Now, since we don't have any results here, well, what do we get a count of? If we take a look over here, well, we just get a count right away of the information that we're getting back here in our JSON file. So we can actually go ahead and do that, just get a count straight up of the JSON. So let's take a look at how we'll do this. Instead of doing number of Pokemon, why don't we say number of houses? And since we don't have this one level that we go to, we can just say, all right, let's go ahead and get a count of the elements that we've got in here, and this is going to give us a value of how many elements we have. Again, the reason why we know to do that is this starts with a bracket, so we know it's an array right away. We can see all this stuff showing up, and it's going to look good. So now that we've got the number of houses that we've got, then we want to go through all of them. So we can say for index in 0 ... less than number of houses, and open close parenthesis right in here. I'm getting a little error in here because I need to not have an extra space in there. And now as I go through in here, what do I want to do? Well, remember, as you go through, these are just key value pairs that you want. So whatever the index is, we want to go to the index, and that's going to be our number, our numeric value, and then we want to get to the key here, and we just want to grab the string value at each of these different areas. So again, very similar to what we did in everything else, we just don't have the results prefixing it here because there's no results prefixing it up here. But if we say, let's create let name equal, and then we'll say JSON index, and then we put in our key in here for the key value pair. We want to get the value out of the key value pair here. It's going to be name, and what we want to get in here is dot, and it's going to be string value. And we're going to do this for all of the elements that we want. So we don't just want to get name, we want to get region. So we'll type in region here, and again, you want to verify, and you can just copy them right out of here as well. So you could copy region, you could copy the word coat of arms as well to do, you know, a copy of coat of arms, or just make sure that you spell it exactly properly in the way that it's listed. So we'll say let coat of arms equal index coat of arms, and then the last thing is let words equal and this should be words right here. Now again, one of the things that I'd recommend that you do is also to print out these values so we can make sure that we've got the right values here. So we can say print, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to print out the index value here too, so that we can see, you know, hey, do we have all 50? Or since it's 0 indexed, I can just say index +1, and then let me do string interpolation for these 4 values here. So if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just put in each of these, we're going to do the name, the region, the coat of arms, and the words. And again, you don't have to do this, but it's not a bad idea, especially as a new developer, to make sure that you're getting the data that you want. So at this point, we've gotten the data and we've put it all into these different constants that you're going to see here. And yep, they're showing up here. So start house 50, the first one is the first one, all good, and we see the house name. And again, some of these don't have words, or they don't have coat of arms descriptions in here, but many of them do. You know, here's one, you know, the region is very clearly listed in almost all of them. So now that we've got this looks great. And now that we know that we're getting all of these different values, what we then need to do is we need to append an element of our house info that we just got down here into the house array value that we've got. So this is going to be self.houseArray. And remember, if we forgot self, Xcode would tell us, hey, we need that. And then we're going to say .append. And what we want to append here is a house info element. So we do capital house info here. And then we do open and close parentheses, and inside of this, we put in each of the different properties of house info, which are name, region, coat of arms, and words. So to go back in here, we can just say in between these 2 parentheses, name, comma, region, region, comma, coat of arms, coat of arms. You want to make sure that you get your spelling right here too, comma, and words, words. And what that's going to do is it's just going to grab these guys here. It's going to create a new house info element. It's going to append this to house array. So we've got all of our different elements here. Now that we've got all of this, we want to go ahead and put this into our table view. If we went ahead and ran this, it would grab our data, but we would not update properly in here, because what we want to do is we want to say, hey, wait until you get a response from this URL here before you go ahead and try to write the data in the table or reload the data in the table. So that's when we go ahead and we use this bit here. And if you type this in right from scratch, there's no problem in doing that as well. You can go in right in here, and we want to add our escaping clause. So what we put in here is first the word completed, colon. So completed is just the word that we're going to look for when we say, hey, we have completed this call. So you want to be inside, the completed word should be inside of these curlies here, where the call starts and the call ends, which says, hey, wait until you've finished what's inside these curlies. So either I'm going to get a success or a failure. So right after the curly, after that closes my switch case statement in here, I'm just going to say completed, open and close parenthesis here, just to give the flag, hey, I'm done. Now, inside of completed in here, this is where we do our @escaping. So we put in the word escaping in there, and then we say open parentheses, arrow, open and close parenthesis, arrow, open and close parenthesis. This just means that we're passing nothing in and we're passing nothing out as part of we're not passing anything into the little body of code that we're going to be writing after we do get houses. You'll see in later examples that it is possible to pass some data in to say, you know, hey, it worked or it didn't work, but we handle our success or our failure right here. So now we go over to our viewcontroller.swift, and because we set up this escaping clause, if I go ahead and I retype in get houses, now it doesn't do that right away. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Shift Command K to go ahead and do a rebuild here. And what that does is I didn't do a build and run, just a rebuild. Xcode takes a look and sort of resets its internal database. So now it knows if I go houses dot, and you see how the word code shows up in here. So it now, Xcode has paid attention to the changes that I've made. If I press enter in here, I see code inside, and this is where I do self table view reload data. And so now if I go ahead and build and run, I should see the first 50 houses show up. The one thing that I did not do is I also said that I wanted you to go ahead and put in the numbers beforehand in here. And so let's see how we would go ahead and do that. That's just right down here in our table view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of string interpolation in here in between my double quotes. And I'm going to put in two different items for string interpolation. The first item is going to be just index +1, or it's actually index path.row +1. And again, just like we used the index before, this is just going to give us whatever numeric value we're looking at in the table view here. And then what I want to put in this next bit of string interpolation here is exactly what I've got listed here, which is houses.houseArray index path.row.name. And so now if I go ahead and build and run, I should have exactly what I'm seeing here in my demonstration bit. And here we go. Yep, we've got house 1 through, and if we scroll all the way up, we've got through house 50. So looking good. Now let's see what's next. So at this point, it says we're going to set up the house detail view controller. Again, I advise everybody to, as I mentioned earlier, develop on an iPhone XS and run on, you can run on a XS or a 10, it doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and first add a new view controller to the project. So I'm going to stop the execution of my project here. I'm going to go into the main storyboard, shrink this a little bit so I can see things better. Click on my object library and type in view for view controller, drag the view controller, and plop, let it go. And I want this view controller to be right over here to the right because I'm going to be segueing from here to here. This is going to be my house detail. And then I say create a show segue from the table view cell in view controller and set the segue identifier to show house info, upper camel case. So if I click on my cell here, you want to make sure that you clicked on the cell and not the stuff inside of the cell. So make sure you click the cell, and then you can just do control drag over, let go. It's going to be a show segue. And I say give that segue an identifier. So you got to click on the segue itself, go up to the identifier, and this identifier is, let me take a look at my notes again, it's show house info. So show house info, upper camel case, press enter. We've given this an identifier. Next up, so we've created the segue. Create a Swift file for the view controller, call it house detail view controller, and do everything necessary so that it works with the new view controller that you've just added. So underneath my view controller file here, again, it doesn't really matter where you put it, but I like to put them kind of in the order that they show. I'm going to go File, New, File, and I'm going to select Cocoa Touch class here because I am subclassing the view controller. So it's not a new Swift file, it's a Cocoa Touch class. I'm taking one of Apple's blueprints and I'm extending it. So we're subclassing, and when we click on next here, what are we subclassing? We're going to subclass the UI view controller. So make sure that you've selected UI view controller. That's going to be very important. And we're going to call this house detail view controller. Click on next, and just save this, and it creates the file for us over here, which is great. I don't need these comments in here, so I can get rid of those just so that they don't clutter up my Swift file. But what else we need to do is, in order to be able to make sure that we can use this house detail file with our view controller that we just added to the main storyboard, notice when we hover over the yellow here, it's called view controller, but wait, this one's called view controller too. We want to make sure the reason why this is called view controller, and we can see it just says view controller here, is because we have not set its identity to house detail view controller. So if I click on the yellow ball for our new view controller here, and then click on the identity inspector, which looks like an ID card or a newspaper, click on class, and then select house detail view controller, we can see now when I hover over it says house detail view controller, it says it here as well, and we're all set up, and now we can go ahead and we can create outlets and whatnot. So now there's a lot of data which is in here, or I'm sorry, there are a number of different elements that we're creating in here, and you get information on what to do. It says the names in bold refer to names that you should use when referring to these interface builder objects in your Swift code. So essentially that's the IB object name. So to say that without directly saying, hey, do IB objects. This one isn't in bold here, so it's just, static text for region, the same for static text for coat of arms, although we're going to eventually create an IB outlet for that too, because we're going to hide it or show it. But first, let's do all of these different labels plus this image view that we've got in here, and you get information in here. So this should be papyrus, regular 36, 112 in height, and center text alignment. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to zoom in, click on add a label, type in the word label, drag this over. Let's see, what did it say? 112 in height. So you can either try to do this manually, or you can just go over here and say, what do you want your height to be? 112. I say specifically at this point, don't worry about setting constraints, because that's just going to kind of slow us down. But we do want things to, have the attributes that I've asked you to use in here. So if we click on fonts, this font is also going to be Papyrus. So again, custom, and the font is going to be Papyrus right there. Press enter. I want this to be 36. I also want to center this. And, again, you can put in some stuff that you want in here just as placeholder text, but I say to remove any of that stuff in here. So if you want to see just how it looks, how Swiftmeister of Apple Park, we're going to delete all that stuff in just a bit. This reminds us, though, if we take a look at all of this, that I also say display to multiple lines and then set auto shrink to minimum font size. So for multiple lines here, we know that we just set line to 0. That looks good. And then we have the auto shrink here for minimum font size too. That'll look good. That's all set up. So now that I've got this, I also want to do, and just make sure we've done everything in here. Now I want the words label to be pretty much the same, except it's going to be 75 in height. It's going to be the condensed papyrus style for 24 points. So let me just go ahead and do this, drag this down. Let me put in excellence is not optional. Some houses don't have words. And for the font size, so I mentioned for the style, it should be condensed. The size should be 24. And the height for this should be 75. So go ahead and change that. So that's looking good too. So next is we've got the region label in here, which is just Gill Sands, bold 17, left justified, and it says region. So I can just go ahead and drag another label over and let that go. And I will say in here, custom, and it's going to be G for Gill Sands, and I mentioned make this bold and 17 and left justified, and it should say region colon in here, so that's looking good. Then I want to have the actual region label in here, which is going to be Papyrus 24, 42 in height. So pretty much everything that I have here, but it's going to be smaller. So, and why don't I just put in Chestnut Hill so that I've got some placeholder text in here. I want to left align it, drag this over, sort of position that roughly where I think it should be, which is great. And I say that this should specifically be 42 in height, so I'll go ahead and put in 42. And that's looking good. Starting to look exactly like I have in here. Under the region label is the region image view, which is an image view. Content mode should be aspect fit. So just drag that in. I don't give you any parameters for how big it should be, so just use your best judgment. Drag this in and drag it down here. And you can put just any of the images in here, but we want to get rid of that at some point. So just to see how things look, I select Adorn. Do make sure though that you do content aspect fit so we don't have any distortion in our map. So that's looking good. And in fact, you can shrink that up just a little bit if you want to, just to give yourself some more space down here. And then we want coat of arms, which is going to be just like this region one here. So I'm going to do Command D to duplicate this, drag region down, and I'll call it coat of arms. And then what we also want to do down here is, now this is a little bit tricky. I say make sure that it's a text view. We want papyrus style condensed 17 point. The behavior is deselect, so we want to deselect the editable thing, and the indicator should only show the vertical, not the horizontal. So all right, let's go ahead and add that text view. And the reason why I want to do this is the coat of arms might be kind of long, so we want to be able to scroll through them. So if we click over here and type in text view, so text, we have two different options. We want the view. And I'm just going to drag this over here at some point where I think that that fits in. Just going to adjust that. Again, you don't really need to be super precise about this. You want to just, follow along with any of the instructions that I've given you. And if I haven't, improvise. And we'll say this is the coat of arms. It could go on for several lines. And I can shrink this up so that it just touches on the bottom here. And I mentioned to set the font to Papyrus Condensed as well. So that's going to be custom Papyrus and Condensed and 17. And it's left justified, but the other things that I say is deselect where it says editable in here, so you shouldn't be able to edit this. And also you should have, for the different scrolling options here, show the vertical indicator, but not the horizontal indicator here. And if we do like just lots of text in here, so I'm just gonna copy and paste this so you can see what would happen if we have lots of different lines in here. And you'll see them in here, and then we will have a scroll which shows up, or the ability to scroll if you move your finger in here in your executing app. So now that we've got this all done, this looks good. We haven't set up our IB outlets for these guys though, these things all in bold, so why don't we go ahead and do that as well. So if I click on viewcontroller.swift, or I'm sorry, house detail viewcontroller.swift, and option click on main storyboard, I get into my assistant editor mode, and I can click on each of these elements individually. So this top label here, I want to call main name label. So I control drag over, call this name label, and connect. I want to control drag over and call this the words label. So drag it over, let go, words label, and click on connect. I'm going to click on the region here and call this region label. Click on connect. I want to call this the region image view for that image view there. Control drag over, let go, region image view. And again, you can verify you're doing the right thing because it says right down here the type is UI image view. So good, I clicked on it properly. Click on connect. And I'm going to call this the coat of arms text view. So I'll say coat of arms text view. And it is indeed a UI text view. Click on connect. And we've set all these ones up. Now in part E, whenever a house is selected, we want to pass the house array info over to house detail view controller and then display it on screen. So how do we do that? Well, in the house detail view controller.swift, we need to create a variable house info that's of struct type house info. This is our variable that catches the data that's being passed over. So again, when we set this stuff up, let me get out of my assistant mode here. Now remember how this works. We're going to click on an element here. We're going to pass data over. So we need to have a variable that's going to connect the data, or that's going to catch the data that's being passed over. That's why we get over here, and we're going to create a new variable var house info, which is of type house info. So I can just say equal capital house info, and then set it to the struct factory here with open and close parenthesis. So this will create this from scratch. It is possible to do it the other way as well. So if you do, and you say, hey, I don't want to initialize it, but I just want to declare it, you could do this too. Either way will work. But right here, what this is going to do is it's going to create it, and it's going to use the default values to make sure that we've got nothing in here, which is our default values in here are just empty strings. So now that we've got this set up, we've got something that we can pass in. So how do we pass the value in? Well, what we do here is we use our prepare for Segue. So again, that's right inside of our viewcontroller.swift code. If we start to type in prepare, you want prepare for Segue here. Now, normally when we did prepare for Segue, and you might have this in your notes, well, the first thing that we do is we want to try to figure out what our destination is. So we'll say let destination equal, and then it's going to be segue.destination. And remember, this says just like a generic view controller. If I option click on top of it, it says it's a view controller. But I want to say in here, we always do the as exclamation point, and then this is going to be house detail view controller. And by doing this, we make sure that this destination knows about all of the different properties of house detail view controller. Now, what we've done normally in your notes is we've said, hey, if we're going from one particular segue, so we usually check and say if segue.identifier equals, but you actually don't need that for this. If you did put that in, no problem. You just put in some extra stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in the 3 lines that we need, because we only have one run Segue. So that's why we don't need that extra code. But if you put the extra code in there, no problem. In fact, that's not a bad idea if you were writing the kind of app that you would eventually add houses to, and you have a plus up here. But we're not at this. We're just getting data, so we just have the show Segue. So I'm going to just put in the absolute minimum that we need in here. But if you added the extra stuff and it still works, no problem at all. So once we know where we're going, what we want to do is we want to figure out what did you click on. So if we say let selected index equal, and this is table view dot index path for selected row, and we can just force unwrap that. Again, we know we're never going to segue unless you click on a table view cell, and we know that because when we created the segue here, we did it directly from this cell here. So there's no problem in doing a force unwrap inside of viewcontroller.swift. Once we get this, we know what our selected index is, so we can say destination dot, and now notice what we can type in here. It should know about house info here. It should. It's not showing up though. So let me go ahead and just do a Shift Command K to rethink these things. And now if I say, now it says description dot house info shows up. So it knows destination has house info inside of it. And I can say that equals, and it's going to equal lowercase houses at selected index dot row. And so this is going to pass this over. And now look, we're not going to do the dot name and the dot coat of arms or whatever. This is going to pass over the whole structure of, and I'm sorry, it's not houses, it's houses dot house array, I should have said in there. So it's going to pass in a whole structure here of what is house info. Oh, it's of type house info. And in fact, remember, that's what house array is as well. If you look up in houses, house array is an array of house info. So what we say in here is we say, hey, just grab, whatever you've selected and take all of the data. Remember, each house info has, if we click on it, it's got a name, a region, a coat of arms, and a words. So this should work when we go ahead and we build and run. Now that we have all of the data over in here, though, I'd mention in the next thing, so we've created our house info. We've got that property in here. We did everything that we need to pass the house info data into house detail view controller. And now we want to update the user interface for house info. You could put this straight up in view did load, but I usually create an update interface function for this. So if I do right under here and say func update user interface, you don't have to do that, but it just sort of isolates your code and makes it a little bit easier to read. And then I can call that right in here in my view did load. And what I'll want to do here is I want to say name label.text equals, and it should equal house info dot name, and let's see, region label.text equals house info dot region. Now, a couple of the other things that we want to do as well. If we take a look down here, it says if the house doesn't have a coat of arms description, so if the coat of arms is equal to an empty string, then what we want to do is we want to hide the static label that says coat of arms. And it reminds you, it says be sure to show the static label text label coat of arms if there is something other than the empty string in there. So meaning that there's something other than the empty string in the coat of arms property of our house info. And it says, hey, you're going to need to create another Iboutlet for coat of arms, and why don't you call that, the coat of arms label. So we'll go back to Xcode, click on house detail view controller, and option click on main storyboard so that we're in the assistant editor mode here. We are going to be working with the attributes for this element right down here, this coat of arms. So control drag from coat of arms. Whoops, I want to make sure that I get the coat of arms. So definitely want to select that, make sure that's selected. I think I selected the text view by accident. Control drag over and let go. And what did I say to call this? Coat of arms label. So coat of arms label, and click on connect. And so now we've got this Iboutlet for this. And now that we've done this, what we can do when we update our user interface is we can say if house info dot coat of arms equals equals empty string, then we can say coat of arms label dot is hidden, not is highlighted, is hidden equals true. And again, we've used this in some of our exercises as well, as hidden is just a property of it. Otherwise, we don't have to worry about hiding it. We should make sure, though, that we do an update where we will update the coat of arms text view. So we'll say down here, coat of arms text view, or not coat of arms label, coat of arms text view dot text equals, and this is going to be house info dot coat of arms. Now the next thing that I ask in here is we say if a house does not have any words, then we just show a blank in here. But if the house does have words, then what we want to do is we want to surround the phrase with double quotes. So okay, we want to put double quotes around it. You see how we have in here, this one says for House Aaron of Erie, it says as high as honor shows up here. So, all right, how are we going to go ahead and do this? Well, if we're back in our code, we can say if house info dot words, and again, if it's not an empty string, we want to put double quotes around the words here. So if we say if house info dot words does not equal an empty string, then we want to put quotes around it. So, all right, we normally would print out house info dot words. So how do we go ahead and put quotes around it? So we could, do the update right in here too if we want to just see, let's say, what is our words field in here? It's called words label.text equals house info words. Now what we want to do is we want to put quotes before and after. How do we do this? Well, we could say plus string, and then we want to put in a double quote. But wait, if we want to do a double quote in here, and we try to put a quote inside of a quote, Xcode isn't going to like this. And in fact, we see it sort of gives us an error in here. So if you don't remember how we do that, that's this escaping character stuff. So remember slash and then the double quote inside of double quotes says, hey, don't consider this to be an ending double quote in here. So this is, again, there weren't a lot of points off for this, but just to know how you can go ahead and work with double quotes inside of strings, it's kind of important. So you could go ahead and do this, or you could do the whole thing inside of string interpolation. So if we did house info words in here inside of string interpolation, then right after the double quote, if we said, okay, we want to put a double quote at the beginning of this, if you do slash double quote, and then we want to do a double quote at the end of this, we can say slash double quote. These slash double quotes, again, you can take a look in your notes about escape characters here. These are going to act as just double quotes here. So the slash says, hey, consider what's after me as something to be able to put in a special character here. So that will go ahead and work if we go ahead and run this. And the other thing that we need to do is we want to update the image that we have here as well. So let's see, update region image so that the image property for region image view is the appropriate image named house region or house info.region. And it says, note that the names here match the names of the images in your assets catalog. So if you take a look at the output that we've got for region, this says the Westerlands, and let's see, for another region that we have down here, this one says Dorn. If you take a look inside of your assets catalog, zoop, we have, there's Dorn, and it shows this map, and then there's one called the Westerlands that will show this map. So cool. If we go back now over, it's pretty straightforward how we would go ahead and do that update. We just say region image view dot image equals, and remember when we want to get the image here, so we're going to go and grab an image out of our assets catalog, so we want to give it the string for the name. So we'll just say UI image, just like we've done in class, open parentheses here. There are lots of different ways that we could set this up, but we want to just give it the name of a particular string, and that string is going to be houseinfo.region. And so it's going to use this as the name for the file to create an image and then slap that into the image property of the image view. So if we build and run, let's take a look and see how things are looking. Game of Thrones is running. The build succeeds, and look at all these house names, which is great. What happens if we click on House All Good? Woo! This shows up and they have regions here. There's the map for them, and there's their coat of arms. What about the next one that we have here for House Allen? So they've got some coat of arms in here too. They've got some words. What about House Amber? So House Amber does not have coat of arms, so that's kind of cool. We don't see anything showing up here. Oh, the one thing we're seeing here is excellent is not optional. So what I have not done is I haven't gotten rid of the extra text in here. There actually isn't any motto for House All Good. So what I'm going to do is go back over into my main storyboard, click on each of these different elements, and I'd advise you to do this specifically in the notes. I just didn't pay attention to what I told you to do. I'm just going to get rid of the default text, which is in all of these ones here. And I'll get rid of the default text for Chestnut Hill and the default text for the coat of arms. And now if we go ahead and build and run, again, you can verify this by taking a look at what the results are. We can say this first one here has no words, so there shouldn't be any quotes that show up. The second one here has both words and coat of arms. And the third one that we have in here is they have, I guess they have words and coat of arms. That's House Ambrose. What about this one up here? This is House Amber, which has no coat of arms and no words. So we go through and select these three and we go through them. And I show you actually what things should look like down here with these three different examples, what it should look like if there are no words, or coat of arms but no words, and words and coat of arms. So if we click on the first one here, they've got no words, but they do have coat of arms for All Good. If we click on Aaron of God's Grace here, we see, okay, they've got coat of arms and words. What about this third one that we have in here? So we can see that's this one here. Notice that we did hide the section that says coat of arms in here, and we don't have any quotes around anything which is in our words. So good, we've got that. Hopefully that's looking good for you. And again, you know, they're just very small point values. For some reason you weren't able to get the quotes around that. It's just 2 points and a 100-point test. Now let's do the splash screen. So it says after completing these steps, your code should show a view controller that acts as a welcome splash screen at launch. The Game of Thrones theme song should begin playing when the view controller first loads. After a 1-second delay, the throne image will move from a location off screen and at the bottom of the screen and float up to the location shown. The animation should take an additional 1 second, so delay a second and then take 1 second. And when you tap on the image, the view controller should segue to the view controller that's named view controller that contains the table view, so that the user can begin exploring the house names. So it says first, let's go ahead and add a new view controller in front of the first navigation controller. So in main storyboard, here's our first navigation controller, and we're going to click here and we're going to say view controller, drag this over, let go, and boom, we're here. Then it says add the Houses of Westeros image to the splash screen by adding an image view, constraining it to 0000, selecting this image, and doing aspect fit. So, all right, that sounds good. I am going to click over here and add an image view, plop that over, constrain it as asked, as requested to 0000. Make sure we're adding 4 constraints. Then for the attributes in here, our image should be Houses of Westeros. And you see how it's all distorted in here? Well, we go to content mode and say aspect fit, and this is looking good. So, all right, great. Now we want to create a Swift file for this new view controller called splash-screen-view-controller.swift and take all of the steps necessary to associate it with this new view controller that we just added to the main storyboard. So I'm just going to go up here, and since that's my first view controller, I'm going to put it just above view-controller.swift. Again, it doesn't matter where you put it, but I like to have them sort of structured this way that the first view controller that I'm going to see is the one that's above here. So if I say File, New, File, I'm creating a CocoaTouch class. I'm subclassing view controller. And what did we call this? Is it splash screen view controller? I think that's what I'd asked you to use. Yep. And click next and create this. And I don't need this extra these extra comments in here, provide me with any real help. And so now that I've created that, that's great, but I need to go back to the main storyboard, remember all the steps to associate this view controller, which is still named at this point view controller. But if I go over here and click on the identity inspector for the class and select splash screen view controller, where are you, splash screen view controller? Right here, and let go. Now if I hover my cursor over, yup, it is now associated with this file that I've just created. So perfect. What's up next? We want to use the attributes inspector to set the splash screen view controller so that it is the initial view controller. And it says you can also just drag the app's start arrow that's shown on the main storyboard to the left side of the new view controller. So you could do either just grab this guy and drag it over here and plop it, or you could click here and use the attribute so you can see more here. Go into the attributes inspector, and there is an is initial view controller option that you can click on right here, and notice that moves the arrow over here. So you'll start here, but how do we get here? Well, let's see what we've got next. This says add a tap gesture to the image view and do everything necessary so that the tap, when it was received, so that a tap will be received when the image is tapped, and use the name image tapped when creating a function that responds to tapping the image. So all right, we're going to deal with the tapping of the image first. So we know that's a tap gesture. So if we go up into our object inspector and we type in tap in here, we get our tap gesture recognizer. We drag that into the image. We see that the tap gesture is showing up here, and we also see down here it says tap gesture recognizer is showing up. Now we want to make sure that we create an action that we can use in here. So again, it says, username tap, image tap when creating a function that responds to tapping on the image. So let's go back over to our splash screen, option click onto our main storyboard to get into our assistant mode. Click on your, and get into our splash screen code. This is the one we want to get in. Let me close these other ones up so I don't confuse. And I'm going to option or control drag over from here, let go. This is going to create an action. We're going to call this image tapped, and we can pass in UI tap description and click on connect. So now we have an action associated with the tap. But remember, and we said that this is something that could regularly occur to cause your stuff not to be working and you're not entirely sure why. We've got to go over, click on our image, and for the image we specifically have to do user interaction enabled. So that's if we don't do that, then the tap gesture is not going to be recognized when we click on our image. So we mentioned that again in Help Elon Musk, and it was also something that was necessary in our Bip the Guy. So again, very important to be able to recognize the taps. So now that we've got this done, let's see what else we need to do. It says, now add a segue and get it to execute when the user taps an image by doing the following. Create a show segue from the splash screen view controller to the navigation controller that had previously started the app. And then we should go, so from the splash screen to the navigation controller, we should call it show table view. Then we want to upgrade the code so that so the show table view segue is performed whenever the image view containing Houses of Westeros is tapped. So, all right, let's go ahead and see how we're going to do this. Well, normally you'd be like, all right, if you tap this, you're going to drag it over. If we control drag over and try to do this, though, we'll notice we can't do that. Oh, okay. This option isn't set up to be able to go from the image view. But remember how we had set up before? We were able to go ahead and create segues simply by control dragging from the name over into the view controller itself, letting go and creating a show segue this way. And then remember that you were able to, when you created buttons programmatically, remember we couldn't draw segues from them. This is the same technique that we used in WeatherGift, for example, when we added buttons to that original page view controller. So same technique that we used before, just in a different context. Control drag over. We also want to name this. So I said that we should call this show table view. So notice again that I clicked on this segue here, clicked on its attributes inspector, call it show table view, press enter. And so now that we've got this going, how do we perform a segue programmatically? Well, if you go right back over here, okay, we're tapping the image. What do we want to do? So if we say perform Segue, oh, look at that. There's actually something called perform segue. We've used this before in our code. Press enter in here with identifier. That's going to be show table view, and the sender could be nil, just so that you know. You could also put in sender equals sender, which is the sender right here, but we've always used nil before, so I'm just going to use nil right here. And so now if we go ahead and build and run, this should work. And I'd mentioned, because I recognized, hey, this might trip up some folks. So if you forgot how to do the segue, you can add a button and call it begin and then segue over. So for full points, you shouldn't do this, but at least things will work, and you can continue to move forward here. So there'll be there is a point deduction if you had to go ahead and use the buttons, but I didn't want to freeze you out of the future points here. So here we go. This shows House of Westeros. If I click on it, and boom, we get the segue working perfectly, exactly like we want it to work. So great. Hopefully you got that. Now let's see what's next here. So write code so that when the app launches and the splash view splash screen first shows the Game of Thrones theme music plays. It's in the file name GOT_theme, so make sure you spelled that correctly. There's a dash between the GOT and the theme. Notice that that's capital G, lowercase o, capital T. So, all right. And another thing you can do, by the way, too, is you can just go into your assets catalog and click on the file here and just copy that name over. But this is a theme that we want to use, but we want to play a song, so we're going to go back into our splash screen here and do everything we need to play sound. So we've done this several times in our code, and we use the same sort of software Lego. So if I say import AV foundation, remember we do that whenever we work with sounds. I'm also going to want to create an audio player, so we typically call that AV audio, or we call that audio player, and we say this is AV audio player, and we send that to the class factory by putting the two parentheses here, the object factory for this class, using this blueprint. It's great. And then what we do down in here, hopefully everybody has in their notes, our func, and we'll call this play sound, and remember the play sound function that we had created. We've got our two parameters in here. So the first one is sound name, string, audio player, and this is going to be an in, out, and then AV audio player type. And then inside, this is just where we get the data and then go ahead and play it. So the first line is if let sound equal ns data asset. And open parentheses in here, and the one we specifically want is the one that just gets the string name that we pass in here, and that string name is going to be sound name. And so if we're able to create this, then that's great. Otherwise, we'll say else down here, open and close parentheses, and this is where we put in our error. So I'll say print, and then you can put in, again, angry emoji if you want to, but you don't have to. But I usually put something like that in so that I can see hey, if I've got any errors here. And you can just use like different numbers of emojis for different errors in here. So I'll say error : and then could not load data from file sound name. And again, if you were copying this right from your notes, you might just like do it from top to bottom. But I like to, retype my code snippets from logic. And then typically when you're doing things from their final project, it's totally okay to be able to just copy this function in from other bits of code that you've got. Certainly you can't do that on the test, but you've got a reusable chunk of code that you can continue to reuse. So down here, this is where we have our do, try, catch. So we say do and then catch. We've got open and close parentheses in between that. And I'll say try audio player equals AV audio player, open parentheses here, and we want this one here that does the data throws. Whoops, I lost it for a second in there. Open parenthesis, data throws, so that's this one right here. And the data that we're going to try to grab is the data that we created above, which is just called sound. So we say sound.data. And then if this works, we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're going to print out an error for a catch. So why don't we do actually the error first? So we'll say print error data from sound name could not be played as an audio file. And so that's, again, we have two different possible errors that we can occur at two different stages of this function. But under the try, we'll just say audio player dot play, open and close parenthesis here. Now what we need to do is we need to call this function. So again, we'll just say in here, play sound. The sound name is going to be, and I'll grab that right from our assets catalog, and the audio player is going to be audio player. And again, we have an in-out in here. This is just something we learned we needed to have in order to get this to work properly, because we're modifying a variable that we pass in, which is the audio player variable. And again, sound name, we want to pass in the sound name, and that is assets catalog. You probably remember it's this GoT theme. I want to make sure it's spelled exactly correct, because if I don't spell it correct, I'm going to get an error. And I will paste this into the call in splash screen view controller. There we go. Now let's hear the theme to the Game of Thrones theme as we get this up and running. It's chugging away. Come on. You can feel like you're the Queen of the Iron Throne or the King of the North here, so that's looking good. And now when we click, it doesn't stop it from playing, but that's one of the things that we want to do here as well. If the music is playing when the user taps, stop playing the music before performing the segue. So that's fairly easy to do. If we just go down here, before we perform segue, we can say audio player dot stop. And so just to test this out, we do play. And again, this is something we did when the rocket ship was a really loud bit of music for Help Elon Musk. If you decided you wanted to have more music, but when I clicked, notice that that stopped right away. So good, everything is functioning exactly as we want. Now though, we want to do a little bit of animation. It says animate the throne logo. So refer to the image view containing the throne and the banners as the one image view. So, or I'm sorry, not the one, throne image view. And then have throne image view start off screen at the bottom of the screen when it first runs, and then animate it to the location where it is set on the main storyboard. The animation should take 1 second, and there should be a 1 second delay. So, okay, let's give that a shot here. First of all, since we're going to be manipulating and changing the throne image, we should create an Iboutlet for that. So I've clicked on Splash Screen View Controller, Option click on Main Storyboard. I am in my Assistant Editor mode. I've clicked on here my image view, and I'm going to control drag over from this and add an Iboutlet for this. And let's see, what did we call this? I said to call it not the one throne image view, and click on connect. And so now we've got an Iboutlet for this, which is great. Now what we want to do again is we want to have this be off screen and then bubble it up to the top. So what we want to do is we want to figure out, well, where do we want this to be at the very end? So we're going to keep track of what the Y coordinate is for this, the vertical coordinate, since we're coming up from the bottom here, and we want to save that after our view did load. So let's go over into our view did load here. And if we say let Y at load, you can call it whatever you want, and we can say that this equals the throne image view dot frame dot origin dot y. And this is very similar when we kept, where do we want to return to for the Elon Musk rocket. Well, what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, this is where we want to return to after we do our animation. So now if we say, okay, what are we going to do for the animation itself? Well, we're going to start playing our sound here, and this will go ahead and play. But now what we can do, and by the way, there's no reason why we can't do this like right after as well. But this first thing that we want to do is we want to change and move the throne image off screen. So some of you might do some things where you're, you're hiding it or whatever, but just moving it off screen right away and instantly is totally fine. So if we say this throne image frame origin Y, and we want it to be completely off screen, well, let's think about this. So if this is 0, 0, and we want to move this down here to the very bottom so that you can't see it anymore, well, this is just the view dot frame dot origin or I'm sorry, view.frame dot, and this is going to be the height. So that'll move this so that this spot here moves to the height. You won't be able to see this. So if we go back into our code, whoops, for the splash screen and say throw image view.frame.origin.y equals, and it's view, which is the overall view itself, dot frame dot height. That's going to move the corner that was up at 0, 0, boom, completely off screen. And then what we do is our animation. So if we say UI view dot animate, we got lots of different options here. Typically we'll do duration and animate, but we also want there to be a delay in here. So you can grab any of the ones that have the delay in here and use that. So if I select this here, what's our duration going to be? It's going to be 1.0 for 1 second, but our delay should also be 1 second. Options, we don't have any options in there, so I'm just going to get rid of these guys. And we don't have any completion, so I can get rid of my completion handler in here as well. We don't need that guy. And for animation in here, if I just do open and close parenthesis, what do we want to do? Over that 1 second, we want to move this stuff from its location off screen to its original Y at load. So if I do in here and just say self dot thrown image view dot frame dot origin dot Y equals self dot Y at load. Actually, it's not self dot Y at load, it's just Y at load. So this should bubble that up, and we should see we get our animation as well, waiting 1 second, then taking 1 second to bubble up. So we'll click and run, and just in the way if you watch Game of Thrones, you have the different images of the different cities bubbling up, you'll see your chair bubble up. 1 second wait, then that moves up. Woo, look at that. You're looking really Thronesy. So, so good. Our app is pretty much working great. The one thing that we haven't done is paged JSON. Now this paged JSON is going to require you to do a little bit of thinking about how you might use your Swift skills to manipulate it. So normally when we've done stuff like the Pokemon stuff in the past, and let me pull up some Pokemon stuff here. What is it? Poke API here. If we look at the Pokemon, it would give us, how many Pokemon we have. We would have a next, we would have a previous, and we don't have any of that stuff here. But what we do have is I'd mentioned, hey, there's this attribute here called page, and then there's this one called page size. We're not going to do page size, but that just gives you how many houses you see at a time. But if you change page from page 1 to page 2 and press enter, we start at the second page. And so this is another 50. And you can go all the way up to, I'd mentioned down in here, there's 9 pages. If you want to see, if you take a look at page 10, you'll see that you actually run out of data after page 10. So the last page is 9. So if you take a look and you want to change this, what would it say if we went to page 9? And we don't even get a full 50. There's just 44 that show up in here. That's a number that I just happen to know. It's not showing. So our last one is House Ironwood with a Y of Ironwood. If we were to go to 10, what would we see here in 10? We'd get an empty array. And so you see how we have bracket, close bracket in here. So we know if we ever go ahead and access something and it shows the empty array, then we shouldn't try to access anything anymore because there are no pages for us to get. But if we don't have an empty array, then what we should do is every time we need more data, which means, when we scroll down to the end and we have a situation where what we're looking at down here is the index path.row is going to be the same as the number of elements that we have in our table view, or I guess it's index path row plus 1. Index path.row plus 1 is the number of elements in the table view, and this is just what we did with the Pokemon one as well. Then what we're going to do is we're going to reload more data. When we reload more data, we just want to make sure that we increment our page number by 1 and use that in here. But we also want to make sure that we don't try to reload data in here if we have a situation where we've got no elements in our array. So when you think through, okay, how am I going to go ahead and do this? We take a look at houses.swift in here. We've got a bunch of different options. We want to start paying attention to the page number. And so, as we go ahead and we do our API request in here, we've got our API URL. And if we have successfully gotten some data back, then what we want to do is we want to actually change our API URL. So our API URL down here should be, well, first let's go ahead and we'll increment our page number. So we'll say page number, And you could say plus equals 1, or you could say page number equals page number plus 1. And again, this is going to need a self in here, so we'll just put selfs in front of it because this is a property of the houses class. It's going to hold all the individual houses in here. And then what we want to do is we want to say, hey, when we look at the number of houses, if the number of houses is greater than 0, then we want to update our API URL. So what we can do down here is put in an if statement. So we'll say if number of houses greater than 0, then we'll change API URL, and we'll say that equals, and then it's going to be the same as this API URL, but what we're going to put inside of here is not page equals 1. We'll put in some string interpolation in here, and we'll say it's page number, and it'll be page number. So remember, we got the page number right in here, and in fact, we'll just do self.page number here, so we keep track of each page that we're taking a look at. But what happens if we do have 0? Well, then what we're going to do is we're just going to say API URL equals empty string. Now, there are a lot of different ways to implement this, but this is a pretty decent way because we're essentially sending a message that says, hey, you know, if you have nothing in here, or if we have nothing more to get, then let's set the API URL to nothing. And so what we want to do then is we want to check to see, hey, every time we're about to call get houses, only call get houses if our API URL is not equal to nothing. It's the same sort of thing that we did before where we said, you know, hey, does our API URL begin with HTTP, or does it have the prefix HTTP? So now that we've set this up, again, thinking about what this does, every time we have a successful call, the next API URL should be incremented by a number here, but we only want to update the API URL if we have houses greater than 1. But if we get to a situation where, hey, we're at page 10 now, we can't get any more, then we're going to set the API URL to equal nothing. Now, the reason why we do that is if we go back over and think about, hey, what did we do with our Pokemon one when we said, you know, let's grab more data? Bit of a jump cut here. So how do we handle this in Pokemon? So that was handled inside of our cell for row at. And remember what these different values are as we go down here. So 1 is at indexPath.row 0, all the way down to 50 is going to be indexPath.row plus 1. So if we get down to the situation where indexPath.row plus 1 is equal to the number of elements in the array that's displaying the data, then we want to go ahead and we want to get more stuff. So that's essentially the text that we're going to write in here, the code that we're going to write in here. So we're going to say if indexPath.row plus 1 equals, and it's going to be houses.houseArray.count. Then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to call more data. So that's just the same exact call that we do when we got our first set of data right here, where we do houses get houses, and then when we finally come back, we want to update our reload our table view. So this is going to work fine as we scroll through until we get to the end. Now remember what happens when we get to the end. In our code over here, we have set our API URL to empty when there's no more data to get. So, you know, again, we don't need to pay attention to how many page numbers we've accessed or any of that other stuff. We just need to pay attention to, you know, do we have an empty string in here? So if we go back over to viewController.swift, we're going to check not only is this true, but we'll also say we'll say houses dot API URL is not equal to the empty string. So this is sort of the equivalent of saying, hey, does the houses API begin with HTTP? And again, you know, you could just use different logic for this to be able to check that out. But this works as one way of multiple ways to implement this. And if we build and run and we take a look now how this works, let us see the Game of Thrones. And I'd mentioned there are 444 different houses. So if we scroll through, do we see all of them? So there we go. We got our theme song. We click, the theme song goes away. What happens when we get to the 50th house here? And then are we loading more? We are loading more. Now I don't have you go ahead and do an activity indicator in here. That was not required of you. You should know how to use activity indicators though. I've given you enough to do in this exam, but you might have that on your final exam. But let's see what happens when we keep scrolling and we scroll 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 and we get to 444. Do we stop? And in fact, we do stop and we don't get any errors at all. Nothing showing up in our in our console. So hopefully you feel good about what you've done. We can check on any of these guys here and take a look. And I've never heard of these guys, the Winewoods here and the all different kinds of ones, the Upcliffs and the House Towers and all this other stuff. When we click on it here, they've got no coat of arms and stuff, but some of these other ones do. Let's see. How Swift of the Cornfield. There we go. That's a good one for our class. So hopefully you feel good about this. You've got a cool Game of Thrones API. If you struggled with this, remember there is the retake option at 70%. Come and see me if you have any questions. You can see the TAs too. Stay Swifty, and remember, winter is coming.